What's up? Welcome back to 80/20 Spirituality, the show where I cover the 20% of spiritual topics that yield 80% of spiritual results, being things like increased connection to self, increased connection to God, etc., 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 so personal transformation, all that fun stuff. Today's topic, why negative emotions like hate are low-key spiritual and why the world is your mirror. So I'm going to start out with a quote by Neville Goddard, and then we're going to hop into some pretty surface level examples, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, quote, Neville Goddard says, "Stop trying to change the world since it's only the mirror. Man's attempt to change the world by force is as fruitless as breaking a mirror in the hope of changing his face. Leave the mirror and change your face. Leave the world alone and change your concepts of yourself. The reflection then will be satisfactory." So, what does he mean when he say that? And why does it kind of tie into things like hate? Well, kind of on a on a pretty surface level example, we'll start with. We have work. Thrilling, right? There's, let's say, same place, same employees, like same coworkers, same everything. One day we go in with a pretty negative attitude. We're just woke up on the wrong side of the bed for whatever reason. Oh, everything sucks, I hate it, blah, 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 blah. We go into work, all of a sudden, everything sucks. And it's pretty negative. People are giving you side eyes maybe, or your coworkers are being more annoying than usual, or, things like that. Versus, on the flip side, you wake up feeling pretty good. And you're like, man, whatever. You go into work, maybe you get a tip. Your coworkers are actually pretty friendly today, annoy you less. You're like, don't worry guys, I'm Buddha, like it's okay kind of thing. And the day actually ends up being really good. And what was the only difference? Perception of self, right? Or internal state more specifically. So where does hate and things like that kind of come into the equation? Well, funny enough, let's take an example of someone who has, like, let's say you have a friend or someone else who just yaps all the time about this hobby that he's really, really into. Or maybe someone else, they do something, maybe they like weightlift a bunch, right? And they post all the time and you're like, oh my gosh, can you be so egotistical? Like, what the hell, right? All these kinds of things. Now, the world is your mirror. What can we grasp from that? And granted, I want to preface all of this by saying, we're using this as a tool for growth, all right? Because if there's an agitation internally, that typically means that there is something that's not really aligned with the reality of things. At least that's how I like to view it. So let's take the hate on the person that's egotistical, right? Posting their gym selfies and things like that, setting unrealistic expectations for all of us, blah, 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 right? Now, in this concept of the world is your mirror, what is the mirror trying to reflect back to you? Personally, I think it's this feeling of like, well, I could do that as well, right? But for whatever reason, I'm not. And then for whatever reason, it really kind of pisses me off, right? So we use that pissed offness to reflect on an area that might not necessarily be so easy to see at first. Now, this concept actually goes pretty deep if you play with it quite a bit. And that is still, I'd say, semi-surface level, because you're like, well, there's things that really bother me and maybe are a little bit more nebulous. And I want to kind of like steer this from blatant advice, because in summary, to wrap up that whole section, we can use this mirror as like a really good way to see like, okay, if this thing is annoying me or this thing is kind of pissing me off for no real reason, right? Where is it trying to reflect? Think about it kind of like a bee sting, where it's like, okay, I got stung somewhere in my soul and there's some sort of agitation against it. And I can use that agitation to then locate where this wound is, heal the wounds, pull the stinger out, put ointment on your wound, and then go about your day. It's like if you leave all those stings in and you just continue to get stung by life, which, happens to all of us, it gets pretty gnarly pretty fast and you become a pretty hateful person, right? So it's a good opportunity to like actually sit down and take a look at self. Now, there was a definite, like, now kind of transitioning into more of a personal story of how I've seen this happen in my life, like outside of theory, right? This apartment that I'm in right now, I moved here when I had a pretty rough life transition that left me in a very deep depression. And it's funny because it's like, I look at these walls and right now they seem a little bit brighter than what they were when I was in that state. I was working as a personal trainer at the time, and there was this road that I drive down every single day, right, to go train. And I remember when I was in that very depressed state, that the world just seemed darker. The world just seemed like sadder, right? There was sadness in everyone and in everything, and I just roiled in it, right? And then as I had found different things to help me change my mind and to become okay internally, set new goals, recover, etc., it allowed me to start seeing the world a little bit differently. And as a result, when I was seeing the world differently, the world reflected back to me a new version, like a different version of self, like a self that was like, people, instead of being like kind of sad and distant, started becoming warmer and more approachable to me. And I started making more friends again. And genuinely just, life just gets better in that way, right? But the trick here is that something internal has to change in order to get that external result. The world is your mirror. Say like we have these negative emotions that reflect back at us. So we can have points of like, oh, okay, like that thing's bothering me. So I'm going to use that negative emotion as a signal to say, okay, there's something internal that needs to change. And then when that changes, the world reflects it back, right? And then I think this can be used in a different way, kind of like on the more manifestation into things. You continue to kind of like work on and change different internal states and beliefs, and the world eventually reflects it back to you. Actually, you know what's really funny? And like a pretty good example of this, there's this guy on TikTok named Zacharific who was just like, he would just joke around all the time about like being so humble and so rich and like that kind of thing. And then homie fucking manifested it. He is now like actually pretty rich and like pretty all over the place, right? And I would say that is in part, you know, due to his hustle and whatnot, but also a pretty big part to like, you keep putting it out there and eventually the world reflects it back to you. Like the world really is a giant mirror, and this is low-key a pretty big hack. So how do we use this? How do we actually apply this? Well, a good first starting place is saying, are there things that really piss me off for whatever reason, right? Let's use that to reflect back to areas that we can heal. When we heal, we think more clearly, and when we think more clearly, we're then able to decide how we want to design our life. Because if we're in pain all the time, it is really, really, really hard to do just about anything else besides be in pain, right? So for me, little mushrooms friends help me get out of a very negative mental state and learn to see the world a little bit differently. So there are paths to seeing the world differently here. But outside of that, let's say we get healed, what do we do from there? Then we start working on designing our life. We have new vision, new things, etc., like that. And as we become clear on those things, the world starts reflecting back to us that vision. And it starts to manifest. There's a little bit of a lag, not gonna lie, right? It's not gonna happen overnight. But if that vision is held consistently in the internal world, it will reflect back. It's just an inevitability. If you say, oh, I'm super, super rich, right? But more specifically, here's how I'm gonna get rich and things like that, and you hold on to those thoughts and beliefs, then the way will manifest itself forward. It'll become clear. And then you have the option to walk that path and bring that into reality. So that's basically it for this video. I'm gonna try and get better at explaining these concepts. So if there's something that was confusing or that you wanna comment on, I'm more than happy to hear any feedback. But anyway, hope you have a good rest of your day. Peace.